speaking of AI and integrations into industries, let's talk about some mind and gun control.
Mind and gun control.
Mind control research intensifies.
Gun violence is an epidemic.
Yahoo.com being mirrored by the New York Times. In a violent America, safety becomes a sales pitch, which is, again, just a beautiful headline saying the loud or the quiet part out loud, which is, problem, reaction, solution, the Hegelian dialectic at work. In a violent America, meaning if you make America violent, safety becomes a sales pitch. Yes. The school year was starting in 10 days, and Donald Keegan was a busy man, an associate superintendent of the North Syracuse Central School District. Keegan had to make sure the bus drivers were trained, the cafeterias fully staffed. He had a tour to lead that afternoon and a school board meeting in the evening. But that late August morning, Keegan took time to attend a demonstration inside a local factory where he observed a series of windows being obliterated by an AR-15 style rifle.
Man, that's got to be part of the quota. Nobody talks about AR-15 style rifles except mainstream media. It's so weird.
Yeah, right. Keegan was joined by other school officials from Central New York, a school custodian, and a pair of school architects. They stood with their arms crossed as Tom, I don't know how to say this, CZYZ, Sizz, maybe?
Sizzes.
I'm going to say Sizz, the founder of Armored One, a company that sells protective glass and film, fired more than 30 rounds out a window at close range. The room shook with skull-rattling force. By the end of the presentation, Sizz's arms were speckled with shards of glass and dripping with blood.
Oh my gosh.
What?
What kind of presentation is this?
Why so much blood?
Aren't they supposed to be... Isn't this supposed to be a pro? Okay, anyway. Continue.
I don't know why it was dripping with blood.
It's the glass cut him.
It's sad, really, Keegan said later in an interview, quote, but it's part of our job to make sure kids don't get shot. That is part of the current reality.
Yes.
I would argue it's probably always been a part of your reality. I mean, from the inception of school, I'm pretty sure part of their responsibility was making sure that kids don't get shot.
Children, yeah.
Of all the troubling aspects of gun violence, among the most dispiriting, maybe the scenes like the one in the Syracuse, New York glass factory, preparing school administrators for a mass shooting is becoming routine. Rising gun violence, punctuated by massacres such as the attack at the elementary school in Uvalde, Texas last year, and the shooting on Michigan State University's campus this week, is fueling not only the debate over gun control, but is also a more than $3 billion industry of companies working to protect children or employees against mass murder. Ooh. The offerings are numerous: automatically locking doors, bullet-resistant tables, Kevlar backpacks, artificial intelligence that detects guns, and countless types of training exercises, like breathing techniques to avoid panic during an attack, or strategies on how to use a pencil to pierce a shooter's eyes.
Yeah,
breathing techniques or Krav Maga. Those are the two. But even as Congress increases funding for school security measures, including $300 million to help schools, quote, prevent and respond to violence as part of a bipartisan gun control compromise, the effectiveness of the school security industry's products and services remains largely unproven.
It's because they haven't deployed the robots yet.
Yeah. Well, it's a very new industry. Quote, this is an entire industry that capitalizes on school shootings. However, these companies, how rattling is that just opening to the quote?
This guy's critical of it, which is why he's speaking that way.
This is an entire industry that capitalizes on school shootings. However, these companies have very little evidence that what they are selling works, said Otis Johnson, the executive director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Safe and Healthy Schools and a Bloomberg distinguished professor at the university. They have a parenthetical here. Billionaire Michael Bloomberg, an alumnus, has been a major supporter of gun control efforts. Great. Don't know. I mean, that's interesting. Schools and apartments have to be built to withstand fires and earthquakes, and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration issues fines for hazardous working conditions. But there is no equivalent of rigorous and standard monitoring of whether an employer is reasonably prepared for an active shooter. This regulatory netherworld, industries executives say, is partly the result of the nation's political paralysis over guns. Many say protective windows and backpacks would not be necessary if guns, particularly military-style rifles, faced more restrictions. Creating standards for school security against guns, some believe, would be seen as giving into the notion that mass shootings are a part of American life, that they can be defended against but not eliminated. So you can see the tension sort of being presented in this New York Times article, which is, look at these companies who are trying to keep kids safe, but we wouldn't need these companies to keep kids safe if we just got rid of guns.
Yeah, interesting. Kind of a kill two birds with one stone kind of thing, where you can hate guns and also hate industry, hate corporations.
And that's kind of the subtlety of this article. And we run a risk, Gons, of getting a little bogged down in this article because it is very dense and it is very long. Yeah. But the core of what's being communicated by New York Times here is this weird tension between both wanting to ban guns or control more gun control measures, and also having a disdain for capitalism at the same time, because the idea of, this next paragraph kind of gets into it. Sis said that political leaders who did not support stepping up security measures at schools or hardening them were naive. Quote, if you aren't for hardening the schools, then unlock your front door, unlock your windows, and let whoever in, he said. It typically costs about $350 to install an armored one protective window in a classroom door, which Sis said could slow down someone trying to shoot his way into a locked room. With each new mass shooting, more schools and businesses, even in parts of the country that support stricter gun control, which is a fun little detail because, as we know, the most democratically controlled municipalities are the ones with the most shootings, right? Even in parts of the country that support stricter gun control are taking steps to bolster the security of their buildings and train their staff. In a survey of more than 1,000 public schools last year by the National Center for Education and Statistics, a research arm of the Education Department, the majority said they were taking some measures, such as putting locks on doors. Good job. Let's put some locks on those doors.
Oh, wow. Okay.
To defend against shooters. As the threat of violence grows, so is the industry that is offering ways to stop it. And just as a reference back to our conversation about the trains and the balloons, about how it's the media focusing more on reporting the amount of train collision or train derailments, which has been over 1,000 for a long time. Same with balloons. There's millions of balloons floating around the world. And as has been pointed out before with the school shooting situation, there's school shootings all the time. And there has been for a very long time. The idea that when you see a school shooting reported in the news, that is like the next one on the list is just erroneous. They happen all the time, and they always have. I believe there was, when there was a big conversation about there was no school shootings until Columbine. That was proven wrong because there's reports of school shootings like 100 years ago going on in this country. So it's just, unfortunately, anybody saying that it's not a fact of life, it is a horrible thing to happen and horrific. And if there were a way to stop it, that should be taken. But it's not new. It's not new even in the past 20 or 30 years. It's not new in the past 100 years. So just an interesting parallel there with the media playing its role in the worldview crafting. Any comments so far?
I think you covered most of it. There is a line in here that says,
is it the next one?
Yeah,
that's the next one we're going to hit. You can read that if you like.
Yeah, it says, in one measure of how school shootings have become normalized, the industry holds an annual conference. So it's presupposed that it is normalized. It's embedded now. Everyone thinks it's normal now, and it's worked. They've won. They've created this atmosphere. Everyone thinks it's normal now.
Well, and it's kind of telling. Normalized is a very specific term.
Yeah.
They didn't say school shootings have become normal. Mm-hmm. They said school shootings have become normalized, which sounds like it, they would mean the same thing, but they really don't.
There's intention with normalizing something.
To normalize something is to actively have, normalized, made it normal. To be made normal. Right?
Or molded to be normal.
So if you change the word here, it doesn't say, in one measure of how school shootings have become normal, which would mean they just happen.
They happen
and it's just
now.
happens. But in the other way of reading it, or the way that it's written here, in one measure of how school shootings have become made normal, which I think is very telling.
Right. Well, it says normalize. You're saying
that's what I mean.
Replace would have been the better, or not the better, but the more benign way of explaining.
No,
this.
I'm just reading it more specifically. I mean, to say normalized means to be made normal. So they're saying specifically how these shootings have become made normal. And what makes things normal? Who does the normalization? It's the media. It's the worldview crafters. They are the ones who make it normal for train derailments, to be in our daily lives. They're the ones that make it normal for mysterious balloons to be getting shot out of the sky. And they're the ones to be making it normal to regularly hear about school shootings. And it goes into some of the interesting sort of
so I have something here, if you don't mind, because I was looking at this. It says here, most of the vendors or small operators, talking about the technology or the companies that are helping prevent this. But there are a few larger companies like Navigate 360 and Raptor Technologies whose security app was used by the Uvalde School District to alert employees that an active shooter was in the elementary school. But even after the Uvalde school shooting employee used the app, the gunman was able to enter classrooms and carry out the shooting while police officers waited to confront him, which led to more deaths. Now, I looked at Navigator 360 and Raptor Technologies. Both appear to be software. So Raptor Technologies is definitely it's an app. Okay, so there's some alert system, whatever. Navigate 360 is more of a platform. They do, a behavioral assessment, and there's a whole package of the 360, right? The whole thing. But neither of them are actual, actual infrastructure, like physical things, whether it's actual bulletproof windows or whatnot. So that's interesting. But as the article goes on here, I think it's interesting that they mentioned this company called Zero Eyes. And it says here, Casino Night was hosted by Zero Eyes, which sells a software platform that monitors existing security cameras and uses artificial intelligence, there it is again, to detect and warn about people carrying guns into buildings. According to the company, if the AI system picks up what appears to be a gun, it sends an alert to a Zero Eyes employee who determines whether the threat is real and law enforcement should be dispatched. And okay, so I went to the Zero Eyes website here. And their logo is, it's an eye. Of course, with some dots and stuff. And it's the same thing. It is what it says. That human verified proactive gun detection solution that integrates into existing security cameras with the mission to stop mass shootings and gun related violence. So it's really specific. And there's a list of some companies who use Zero Eyes already. So you got Subaru, DHS, FedEx, looks like Snapple, and then a few other, kind of like local and smaller companies. So, I mean, maybe if you're in the local Subaru, thinking about buying a Subaru car, and your son brings in like a water gun or something,
sure,
this system might go off, and somebody might be alerted of like, hey, there's a gun-shaped object in your location or something. But also, how effective is this really? Because if they're pulling, I suppose if you're doing the walk-in and you're holding up your AR-15 style rifle or whatever, that's one thing. But, if you're doing the Columbine thing, when you got your trench coat on, no one's going to see the gun until it's ready to shoot, So right. I don't know. The whole thing is,
it's an alert system. And as we saw with Uvalde, and they mentioned here in this article that alert systems only go so far.
Right.
Because in Uvalde, they had an alert system, which is weird that we never heard about it before. We never heard that a teacher used an app to alert the police of a school shooting. It's weird time to hear about it. But if the police aren't going to do their job, then an alert system is not very helpful.
It doesn't do anything. It's just, okay, we're alerted now.
Sure.
Deploy the robots.
The article goes on about a bunch of training and the value of training and who's training. And this is training with, what to do, how to stab somebody's eyeballs, how to jump on them. They have a lot to say about the training aspect. New York Times.
Train, huh? A lot of train going on. By the way, we didn't do the Christian nationalism story of these, what they called Christian terrorists, but their last name was Train too.
Lots of train talk, yes. But you can tell that the author of the New York Times story doesn't like the idea of people having to think about protecting themselves.
Yeah.
They specifically, make some quotes from some of these trainers being like, you know what? We're trying to train people how to think, how to move around in the world, to keep their eye out, to be wary, to know how to spot dangers and then what to do about it. And the article is like, isn't that horrible that they're trying to train people to look out for danger? And it really is quite telling as to the mindset behind the author, which is like, no, I just don't want to think about anything at all, and I just want the police to do everything about it.
Are you referencing this Ken Alexandro, the former police officer in Tennessee who runs Agape Tactical, the company that has taught nurses, teachers, and church staff techniques for defending against a shooter?
People yes, like that? there was a number of them, right?
Yeah. I will say that part of, you're never going to win kind of mentality with the whole New World Order system. What this whole thing with the Agape Tactical, the whole self-defense type of thing, is what Milley talked about in his speech at the, I forget, some graduation, military school graduation, I forget which one, where he talked about urban warfare and how warfare is going to be more on the ground and broken up and smaller groups and tactical teams and stuff like that.
Right.
So it kind of plays right into that system. It's almost like the New York Times is, they don't want to be a part of that. They want to hide behind the military industrial complex to help them. So
yes.
Yeah.
So, and just to skip through, and there's a bunch more, but this is sort of where the New York Times theory, the author's theory, comes into view. This is about 8 paragraphs from the bottom. Many of the executives in the active shooter defense industry who were interviewed for this article said they did not support more guns restrictions. Sis, the owner of Protective Glass Company in Syracuse, said the gun debate, quote, has blinded many schools and businesses into overlooking practical steps they could take, while the broader issues remained mired in politics. Quote, should we start addressing gun laws and mental health? Yep, he said Ziz, a former homicide detective, quote, "But we have been having the same stupid argument since Columbine in 1999. Sis said that he did not support a ban on military-style rifles because he, quote, does not trust the government to carry that out effectively." Maria Clunan, an administrative assistant at a school in Western Massachusetts, said some staff members were worried about the psychological impact that active shooter training could have on students and faculty. The psychological impact of the training. That's what I'm talking about. The very act of being trained to handle danger would have a psychological impact. Quote, "Some folks think the training is too strenuous on kids and staff," said Clunan, who serves on her school's safety team. But she said she believed that such training was helpful 2 years ago when she was director of a nursery school in the Church of Springfield, Massachusetts. Clunan hired a firm run by 2 local law enforcement officers to train her teachers how to deal with a shooter. She had grown nervous because of increased crime in the city. Quote, "We hope and pray this doesn't happen to us," she said, quote, "but we also hope a child never has to use an EpiPen. But if they do, the training kicks in." Keegan, the associate superintendent of North Syracuse, said that he thought there should be tighter gun restrictions, but that the issue felt distant from his daily reality. Quote, "We certainly hope for greater levels of gun control, but that is not something that we are going to hang our hat on," he said. Still, each year, his schools are adding more intense security measures. This fall, for example, North Syracuse has started posting armed officers at its elementary schools, in addition to middle and high schools. The school district recently approved about $30 million for safety and security enhancements to its building. Keegan is considering buying more of Sis's glass. He's constantly being pitched on new products. And a poignant little sentence there at the end. Quote, "We are getting hit with people trying to sell us," he said. "My email is blowing up every day with that stuff." So there's this vibe at the end of this article, making a point about the capitalization of school shootings. And the idea being communicated here is, aren't these companies trying to protect our children horrible capitalist pigs because they don't support gun control, but they do support selling safety equipment to our children or to our schools? And, you know, that's there's not a point there, because when you consider the active shooter, yeah, there's you know, it's just listen, because when you consider the military industrial complex, of course the thinking man's criticism is, well, that's pretty weird that we have ultra powerful corporations who benefit from selling weapons to our government and others, often selling weapons to both sides of a conflict. Yeah. And so they are trying to put the school defense industry in a similar light, saying, hey, look, these guys are trying to protect kids, but they don't want to ban guns. What a capitalist pig way to think about it. Why are they busy selling bulletproof glass and not putting their energy into banning AR-style assault rifles? The implication being they hope, or the implication being sort of crafted is, these school safety companies don't want school violence to end because that's where they get their profits from. If guns are still flowing in the streets and, school shooters are getting free guns with no background checks, then these guys get to make more money. Of course, there are some more subtle points to point out. Aside from that, perhaps if who knows, if Glock was also selling bulletproof glass to schools and selling the guns, that would be a little bit more akin to the military industrial complex. Yeah. But yeah, it's really weird to see such sharp criticism of companies who are trying to protect schools, hardened targets.
Yeah. Well, it all seems to be leading to a situation where your children are going to be even more monitored, and they got to be part of the system. That's a big goal for the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. We covered one of those stories in the last episode.